And guess what? We're live yet again.
Excellent. Nice to be back, Mary Ellen.
It is great to be back, Jared. How's your day been?
It's been busy and crazy, but also exciting. Lots of exciting things happening in science and record world, and yes.
Not going to divulge too much information because, we want to keep them on their toes.
Oh, no, there's plenty. We're writing stories. We're running through deadlines. I had a good conversation with my brother Tulanga, who's pastoring in Invercargill just before this broadcast. And it was really great to hear from him and to look at opportunities for science to be used in Invercargill. So that's exciting. And life is good. We're getting through. We're doing it.
Life is good. That's right. We're doing it. And today we have a very exciting special guest to interview and have a chat with. For you guys watching on, you may have seen the promo videos, and our special guest today comes all the way from the United States. And I understand it's like 11 p.m. there or something, so we're very privileged to have him join us at this point. But it's Pastor Meshach Soli. Hi, Meshach. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
No worries. Now, Meshach, I understand you are the pastor at is it South Bay? Did I get that right?
Yep, correct. South Bay SDA down here in San Diego.
San Diego.
Yep.
Yeah, wow. And I've had a look at your website, and my goodness, it's so impressive, the ministry you do and how just expansive it is. It looks like it's a really vibrant, happening place over there.
Yeah, San Diego is a very active town. And the community that I'm at right now at South Bay, they're a very nurturing community, but they're very open to outreach and just connecting with the neighborhood. And so the Lord planted us here about 3 years ago, my wife and my family, and we have been just blessed to be part of this community ever since.
Amazing. Hey, tell us more about your family. I understand you have, is it 5 boys?
Correct. Yeah. So I'm the proud father of 5 boys. I like to tell people that I was faithful to the first commandment, was to be fruitful and multiply. And so we have it seems like one in every Sabbath school class. So I have 2 older boys. I have an older son, Marley, who's out in Walla Walla. He's going to be 22 actually in a couple of weeks. And then Isaac is my second oldest. He's 19. Sorry, he's 19. He just got back from Andrews. His quarter was done. And then we took like a 9-year break. And then we had 3 back to back. So it was like Zion's 10 years old. Then we have Gideon, who's 8. And then we have the baby of the family, Judah, who's 4 years old. And so if you were to ask anybody, they'd tell you my wife she's raising 6 boys, not just 5 boys. Me.
Wow, that's incredible. A 22-year-old and a 4-year-old. That must make life very interesting.
Very interesting. 1 in every Sabbath school class, so we're good. That's how we stay relevant.
Yeah, Meshach, I've met your boys and they're a delight. I understand Izzy is studying theology, it must be exciting for you as a pastor to sort of see your son, I guess, take those steps. And you just mentioned to us before the broadcast he's going to do some mission abroad coming up this year. How does that go? Because, we're going to talk to you about your ministry and your pastoral sort of work today, but ministry begins in the home. And you've had an interesting journey to become a pastor, but how do you see that calling of your family as that ministry? How do you get your boys, on the right path? Because they're all amazing young men, and I aspire to be a father like that with my children in the church, heading in a good direction in their lives. What does that look like for you and your wife in your family?
Yeah, no, I praise God for like the 2 older boys. They kind of caught the tail end of our lifestyle prior to us getting called to ministry and getting rebaptized. And so I always say that God must have preserved their minds and their hearts, because they have every excuse in the world to kind of wild out, because they were exposed to that lifestyle that we lived prior to us coming into a relationship with Jesus. And so, for the 3 younger boys, it's totally different the way they were raised compared to our 2 older boys. But I believe once we came into ministry, the greatest impact on their life wasn't the way that we lived prior to us coming back to the Lord, but that transformation they were able to witness in myself and in my wife's life when we came to the Lord. We've always made it a priority to include family in ministry in all that we do. And so when we got called to ministry, we made sure to incorporate our kids, whether we're traveling. So, we've been out to Australia, New Zealand. We did quite a few events where we would go through Alaska, Hawaii, Samoa. We would make sure that we would incorporate our kids on that. So they have more of just a local context of ministry, but it's broader and more global. And so they caught that bug at a very young age of traveling and doing ministry and being a part of ministry. Like, they're not just there to watch their dad or their mom do stuff. We try as much as possible to incorporate them in every aspect. And so I'm even the church that I'm at and churches that I've been pastoring at prior to where we are in San Diego, I'm very unapologetic about telling my church family that my church is my first church is my home church. That's my first church. And what I do here should be a byproduct of what I do at the local church and not the other way around. And so my biggest fear has always been that, and this is something that's kept me accountable, is that I want my kids to see the same person they see at home at the pulpit and at church, because nothing is more disparaging or nothing is more damaging to a young person's faith when they see two opposites, one at home who's not even living what he's preaching. And so always made it a priority to make sure that our home church is our first church. And I would think that members would consider that something that we model for them, that they also would consider their home to be their first church. And so that's just some of the things that we've been able to do in regards of just keeping our family on a, some of that missional mindset or that kingdom mindset.
And as we talk about that missional sort of stuff that you're doing in ministry, then, we want to unpack sort of the practical stuff that you're doing, and maybe there's some ideas that our viewers can pick up. But can you just, for context, give us a bit of that journey? It sounds like there's a story to how you came into ministry and how God has, I guess, changed your life to the point where now you're passionate about seeing other people's lives change through the power of the kingdom, So can you tell us a little bit about your life journey to this point of ministry so that we get a background for where you're at and how you're working in your communities now?
Yeah, no. So, prior to me coming to the Lord, I was raised in an Adventist home, second generation Adventist. Parents came to the faith probably around the mid 70s. My mom was, she came over from the Mormon faith, and my dad came over from the London Mission Society. They went to an evangelistic series out this way in California, and they both got baptized. And so we were raised in the church from birth. But I would say, as many young Christians will know, that it was more of my parents' faith than it was my own. I didn't really take ownership of it. And then just a lot of the things that intrigued me at a very young age was more enticing to be out there in the world and running the streets than it was to stay in the church. And so at a very young age, I was, involved in a lot of, gang activity, a lot of just things that just breaks your mother's heart, and your parents' heart, to see you go down that path. And so I grew up sort of in that context where at the age of like 15, I was just constantly in trouble, addicted to alcohol, drugs, violence, gangs, you name the whole gamut, just a very unhealthy lifestyle. And a minister out from that way, Australia, New Zealand, had came out to do a week of prayer by the name of Dr. Paul Chopet, who came out and did a week of revival at my parents' church, and they invited me to go. And I was like, all right, I'll go. I'll check it out. And just like a lot of the other stories you hear, you think that the pastor is talking to you, right? And so this whole week I was like, this guy must be spying on me. Like this, he must be looking in the windows of my home, because everything he is talking about was just so real, relational, and relevant at the time what I was experiencing. So at the end of that revival, me and my wife, who were already on the verge of divorce because of my lifestyle, both got baptized. We were able to reconcile our relationship with the Lord, which helped us to reconcile our relationship with each other and our kids and our family. And so coming into ministry with this mindset of where I came from, the senior pastor at the time, which so happened to be my wife's father, who was a retired minister, asked me to be a youth leader. And this was like, I think it was like days after I got baptized. And I'm like, yo, I'm still trying to kick a habit. I'm just fresh out of the world, coming back into learning my faith again. And he says, if there's anybody that can connect with our young people today and have the Lord to tell it, it's you. And so I says, hey, why not? You know, I went into it thinking, I've tried everything else in this world. Why not try? How bad can young people be? Right. The Lord, yeah, exactly right. The Lord he had some things prepared for me that eventually we just fell in love with just serving young people and watching their lives transform. And a year into that, you know, be careful what you pray for. We just prayed, Lord, if this is something you want us to do and going into ministry, it's like you're going to have to, you know, put the writing on the wall. Dry the fleece or wet the fleece, you know, and within a month of that prayer, I get laid off from my job. Long story short, ended up going to La Sierra University to get my undergrad in theology after being a high school dropout at the 10th grade. So I'm without a high school diploma, no education skills since the age of like 16 years old. And now I'm close to 30 going back into school. And so that in itself was a miracle. And so we've always carried that sort of heart for community, especially a heart for just troubled teens, broken marriages, things of that nature. And so that kind of always stuck with us through all the ministries that we have been through, to always be very compassionate and empathetic towards that aspect of ministry. And so we've always been very hands-on and just looking for new, relevant, creative ways in connecting with people, right? So
yeah, well, what I titled this little promo, and we knew we were going to talk about a lot of things, like you're a very interesting person, you know, but yeah, you've got a paddleboard ministry. And there was an article actually on Adventist Review that talked about how this is like a really unique, creative approach to ministry that you've adopted, but it sort of addresses mental health concerns and allows you to connect with other pastors and also, was it church members as well? Do you want to just talk to us about that ministry?
Yeah, so prior to us moving to San Diego, we lived in the wilderness. And sorry for all my people that are watching from Riverside, Loveland area, because it's a very dry, hot space to be in, especially in the summer. And so me and my wife used to paddleboard in Newport Beach, which is about an hour from where we lived. We always said, if we ever move somewhere that's near a body of water, like the ocean or something like that, I say, we're going to make an investment into paddleboards because we just love doing paddle. And so when we were called to San Diego 3 years ago, before we even found a place to live in San Diego, our first large investment were to buy 2 paddleboards, and they actually were stored in my church office here in San Diego. And people would walk in and say, "What are these 2 big paddleboards doing in the office?" I was like, "Don't worry about it. It's an extracurricular activity that me and my wife love to do." And so we bought paddleboards before we even found a place to stay. We didn't find a place to stay till I think it was in July. So from February to July, we would come out, we would minister in the area for the weekend, take the paddleboards out, and just enjoy just time on the ocean. So when we finally moved here, it just became a hobby that we really loved to get into. And then as we got out here, there was a lot of pastors that were getting transferred out here that I had history with from La Sierra or other spaces in ministry. And that there was just group of pastors that came somewhere around the same time as I got here. Some came a little bit before. And one thing we wanted to do was we got a sense that in this area, and maybe in a lot of other areas in ministry, churches seem to function as silos. You know, they tend to do things within themselves. There was almost this sense of, and this is probably a generational thing, but there was always this sense of being overly territorial where, you know, I grew up in that era where it's like, don't go to those Vespers, you might end up going to their church, right? And so it was kind of one of those things of the fear of sheep stealing. And, you know, one fish going to another bowl and whatever. And so there's just this amazing sense of camaraderie and collaboration with this new group of young pastors. And not saying that it wasn't there before, but there's a stronger sense of it now. And so we started to do things together to kind of change that narrative. We figured if we want our church members to see that we're not in competition with each other, it starts with leadership. And so it started off with us having breakfast at least once a month with all these pastors, youth pastors, senior pastors, young adult pastors, associate pastors. We would pick a spot in San Diego, pick a date, and we always had breakfast. And that kind of led towards just inviting people, hey, you know, I got a paddleboard. You guys want to come out and paddle with me? And that started off with one or two of us pastors, Pastor Will, who's out in Chula Vista, another Pastor Ruben, who's in La Mesa, really good friends of mine. And we started off by just paddling, just the two or three of us. And before you knew it, we're like, hey, we should invite our associates. We should invite some of our youth pastors out here. And so it started to become a thing that every Friday morning at 7:30, we would meet either at Coronado Bay, Mission Beach, La Jolla, spaces like that. And we would just paddle out. And it became so consistent that when the pandemic hit, it was something that really, it was a God thing. Because had it not been, I would say, had it not been for these paddleboard or what we call pastors' board meetings, if it had not been for these pastors' board meetings, man, it really did us well as far as mental health, dealing with the pandemic. We would paddle out and just sit under the bridge in the bay and simply just talk about life. Or even talk about ministry, you know, how you guys doing with the pandemic? What changes have you done? What are the, and we would always leave there with a sense of just feeling kind of relieved. You know, there was a lot of space for decompression, transparency, honesty, and accountability. And so it's been one of those things that God had put together that has now caught on, where we have quite a few. There has to be like 4 or 5 of us that go out consistently now, but there's been up to maybe 8 or 10 of us who've gone out all at one time in the past as well. So,
wow, I'm curious to know what sort of trends, without obviously divulging personal information, what sort of trends have you seen in those discussions that you've had with the pastors? Is there issues with mental health? Are they struggling with the pandemic? Like, why do you go away from those meetings feeling so much better?
Yeah, because you know what? So one of the things that we would discuss quite often is just the reaction of our the temperament of a variety of people within our church. So as you know, in America during the pandemic, and even post, as it's starting to wrap up a little bit more, everything was politicized. So whether you wear a mask or you didn't wear a mask was politicized. Whether you opened the church or you didn't open the church, it was politicized. Everything that you did in church had some kind of undertone that had to deal with politics. And so it was and it still kind of is, but there was a lot of separation. There was disunity in the church. And when we got together, we would just kind of share things like, just some of the concerns that some of our members were sharing with us. And we came to realize, we're not the only ones going through it. We all had similar cases in our church that were dealing with some of the same things. So just to know that, sometimes we wouldn't leave with an answer, to be honest, but just to know that we weren't the only ones going through these situations alone, like just gave you sort of this mental relief that you're not isolated in all of this. And then sometimes we would leave with answers. And then just the fact of just being able to get off your chest, pray about it, knowing that somebody can actually empathize with what you're going through, did a huge favor for our mental health and us going back to serve in those spaces again.
Mm. It seems like the role of the pastor is a very lonely sort of career, because you're moved quite frequently, right? You're sort of put up in many places on a pedestal above the normal members. So you're supposed to love them and serve them and be church family with them. But I imagine it's hard to make those connections in churches, especially for pastors who are moved frequently, or just some people. So what does disunity in the church that you mentioned do to a pastor's sort of mental state, and how can churches and how can people be better at supporting our pastors? Like, what can the church do to come alongside and to make it easier for the pastor to do his or her job?
Yeah, one of the reasons that we were able to kind of navigate through that, Jared, was the fact that my wife, she's a PK, and so her father was a pastor. And the funny thing was, she's like, when we got together, I think I was 15, she was 16. We're high school sweethearts. She says, "I'm never marrying a pastor." I says, "Don't worry, I'm never going to be one."
Wow.
So the way we were able, one of the reasons, I've been able to navigate was that she does a good job in like letting me know some of the things that she dealt with or saw her father have to deal with at a very young age. Like things like staying up at the middle of the night, like till 3 a.m, just worrying about members and worrying about issues in the church. And she would say, "Hey, my dad did that. It didn't work." And she'd say something as simple as, "Trust God and go to sleep." Right. Like that to me was like so profound when she used to tell me that. And so, yeah, the challenge with being a pastor is not that they just move you a lot, but there's a toll that takes place where pastoral ministry is the only place that you would invite your entire family to go to work with you. Right. If I was in the construction business, I'm not bringing my wife and kids to my job. If I were a truck driver, I'm not taking my wife and kids. You bring your entire family into a space that you work in. And so the pressures on pastors is not just personal, but it overflows to your kids, right? It affects your wife, your family. And then you go home and they have all these different, views of what church is like. And some of them have a very distasteful sense of what the body of Christ should look like. And so that adds a whole nother level of anxiety, depression, just pressure on you, because at the same time, you want to guard your family. So, the other thing that you get from just, it's that saying, I know it's played out at times, but it's the truth. We've got to realize that hurt people hurt people. And oftentimes, because you're the pastor, you're the largest target there. It's something that we get into as far as when you are called to ministry, to understand that we shouldn't romanticize this idea of ministry, that there is a lot of work to be done. But a great friend of mine, Sister Rhonda, had shared this quote with me that helps me. And she says what she tells a lot of her leaders and her workers and some people that she works with, she does social work, is that the job title Savior is already taken. Right. that job title is taken already. And so just going into spaces like that, realizing that, hey, I'm not a savior. That's Jesus's job. I'm just a conduit of what the Holy Spirit can do and use in that space. I would say for members, though, be empathetic towards your pastor. He's human. He has a family just like you do. Try to put yourself in his position. Some people don't realize the pressure that we go home with, that we wear on our shoulders, and those long nights where you're up worrying. And these aren't just, we're not just talking about worrying about members that have issues with you. Right? We're talking about members who have, like, this pandemic has been so rough because I have not done as many funerals right? I've not officiated this many funerals in just 1 year. And then when you're talking about funerals, it's been a totally different shift in how funerals are done here, where families can't have their entire family there. You're limited who can come there. You're limited to the worship service and some of the cultural things that you're used to. And so you as a pastor have to walk in that space and not only be a sense of hope and encouragement to those who are bereaving, but at the same time, you're trying to navigate through this entire pandemic all at the same time. So there's people that are dealing with death. There's people that are dealing with issues with teens at home. There's marital issues. And so it's not just one thing. It's a whole plethora of just challenges that you deal with on a daily basis. And so finding a space where you have other people to talk to and kind of, like you said, I think you hit it on the nose there, Jared, because one of our mentors says that, yes, ministry can be a lonely place, because even in ministry, sometimes you think like, I don't know if I can share this with this pastor, or I don't want other people to look at me in a negative light if I share with this pastor. But I think what we've created at these paddleboard meetings, where there's a non-judgmental spirit about people that we go out and paddle with, that people say safe spaces, but I believe in safe people.
Yeah.
And so that has really gone a long way for us to find some safe people where we're just kind of able to kind of just decompress and be very transparent about what we're going through. And that in itself is already something that alleviates a lot of the stress.
Is there anything that you do? I know we've kind of covered this a little bit, but I'm interested, like, practically, to set boundaries for you and your family when it comes to your church? Because I know you mentioned, you're talking to the pastors, and that's very cathartic and that's great. But I imagine that there's situations where, like, you want to just brain dump on your family or your wife, and it's like, I've had the worst day, but you feel like, I probably shouldn't because that's burdening them. Like, how do you navigate those boundaries?
Yeah, you're it's been a challenge. Because again, like I said, sometimes they know already why something has been said or done at church. And when you get home and you don't say anything about it, maybe somebody else will say, hey, how come so-and-so or brother so-and-so did that? Or, and so it brings up the conversation. But yes, we've learned as far as when our kids ask questions that pertain to certain issues in the church, we don't go into details. We just we share with them some of what they need to know. But we always end it with saying, hey, they're just as much as God's children as we are. And we always because I don't want to paint a romanticized picture of ministry for my kids. Like, I think we do them a disfavor when I tell them, look, we serve a church of broken people, right? And I tell my church all the time when I welcome them and I welcome visitors and guests to our church, it says, welcome to our dysfunctional family, right?
Yeah.
And then I point out, just like your dysfunctional family, because we all have some sort of dysfunctional. And once you kind of lay it out there, it kind of gives people this, okay, I can actually remove the masking. So we don't share so much details so our kids will be just so jaded by the church experience, but we want them to have a good picture of what ministry is about, a healthy picture, but also point them to, hey, as the Bible says, it's a hospital for sick people. We're all sick in need of a savior. And so giving them that balance between the good and also the challenging has really built a good perspective for the way that they view church. Yeah.
Yeah, being a child of God is the great equalizer, sort of remembering that everyone's human. That's a great perspective. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah,
absolutely. We have a couple of comments here I just want to put on the screen before Jared moves on to the next bit. Lena, she says, hi, family. We miss and love you guys. Proud of the work you guys are doing. So just some encouragement for you there. Dave Edgren, also, this was related to when you're talking about your boys. He said one of your kids in every Sabbath school class gives you a quick systems check at Sabbath school. At Sabbath lunch, how's the church running, kids? So that's a funny one from him. And then he also says, safe people are safe places. And I think that's
correct.
Right there.
Thank you, Dave. Hi, Lena.
Yeah, and I love the paddleboard ministry because often for men we have trouble talking in face-to-face, confrontational sort of situations, but get alongside doing an activity together. They've done countless studies on this, and whether it was intentional or, as you say, a God thing that just sort of happened, it seems like water is a very healing space, and exercise activity is very healing, and to bring all those things together is just that's really exciting, like ticking all those boxes. So God really did an amazing work in that space. But I'd like to pivot the conversation a little bit, and I think some of the issues will still be pertinent. But your 2% ministry that you're involved with for the NAD, I believe, across the NAD, can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that sort of steps outside of your work at the local church, and it has broader applications for the church in NAD, and potentially in our South Pacific division, because we have a lot of Pacifica people in our division.
Sure.
Many of them are on our Facebook and might be watching this interview. So I'd like to touch on some issues that pertain to ministry, church life, relationships in that community, in that space that you're developing these resources in. So can you tell us a little bit about the 2% ministry that you've got going?
Yeah, so it started off at the E-Huddle, and I believe there was quite a few of the pastors that came out from Australia that have attended the E-Huddle with Jose Cortez at the North American division as well. I was asked to do a workshop on why ethnic minorities, more so Pacific Islanders, were leaving the church in North American division. So I did a survey and I took it to the E-Huddle. I think it was in 2017. It was 2017. And I took a study there to the E-Huddle. Little did I know when I got there, the audience there would be a lot of the conference presidents, leaders, administration, division, union, medical professionals. And I'm like, yo, what am I doing here, right? Like, what's going on here? And so as I got there, just that natural sense of like, I feel like I'm like the most uneducated person in the entire room, right? Because I'm just like, what is this island boy doing in this space? Prior to me going up to give my presentation, one of the administrators at the division gave us a pie chart of the different ethnic groups that represent North American division. And so they did the African American, Caucasian, Hispanic, Asian, and it started to trickle down to a lower percentage when it finally came up to what it said, natives and others, which is included, Pacific Islanders, and it was 2%. Wow. And so we make up 2%, probably less if you want to break it down to Pacific Islanders, but we make roughly around 2% of the membership in North America. And it was at that moment that I realized that I'm onto something very unique and a very huge God opportunity to actually speak at this platform on behalf of 2% of our members that probably would not have a voice in this space. And so as I shared the contents of what I had surveyed on, following that really opened up my eyes in regards to creating a platform for 2% of our people that normally wouldn't have a place at the table. And they say if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so since then, it was just something that we kind of like hashtagged with college students that are up and coming Pacific Islander pastors or leaders that were trying to get involved. And we wanted to kind of showcase, highlight some of the things that we're doing. And we would just tag the 2%. But it actually developed into something bigger after we had our Samoan camp meeting for the North American division about 2 years ago. And that's when Pastor Rome Mulia, who's also out from Australia, who's now in Washington, Evangelist Nehemiah Falatongo, and also Mikey Ken, who's also a leader out there, had pulled me aside and says, hey, man, we see this being something bigger and casted a vision on what the 2% can be. And so, long story short, we created a space for us to do mentorship, evangelism, focusing on Indigenous people, leadership, and just creating a network, a space, and a platform for Pacific Islanders to thrive. And to the whole idea is we wanted to take a holistic approach to ministry. So it's not just dealing with the spiritual, but we are focusing on cultural, spiritual, and also social focuses in there. And so the 2% has been, since last August, we officially launched the nonprofit. And we are not independent, but we are supported and sponsored by our local conferences and our division and unions. And the whole idea is like, how can we help our people become a greater blessing to the larger community around? And so in short, that's what the 2% has developed to become. We just did a Global Youth Day in March, which was a blessing. We held that in Washington. And then November, we did a Global Pacifica Community Day where we had people from Samoa, had some folks out in other areas in United States and other countries join us in serving our community. And then in August, we're actually having a develop. It's on a larger scale, so it's a leadership conference, kind of like what they have out here. They call it PELC. It's the Preaching Evangelist Leadership Conference that our African American brothers and sisters host at Oakwood. And so it's something similar to that, but more of a context in the Pacific Islander culture. And so we've got some people, I don't want to throw their names out there yet, but some people prayerfully out from Australia. Matter of fact, I got two from there and maybe one from New Zealand. If things open up for them to get out here, that's going to help lead that out. And it'll be going live. So we're going to offer people registration in person and also live stream. So that's where we're at right now. So praise God.
I'm sure a lot of people from the SPD will be very interested in that, given the demographic that we've got. So yeah, that's really awesome.
I'm interested, Meshach, in drilling down a little bit because there is a perception, or perhaps from your paper that you presented and some of the research you've done since, that these second generation sort of kids and your own experience bears this somewhat, do leave the church in Pacifica and some of the ethnic cultures that you're dealing with. Were you able to discover sort of why, any of the whys, and what that looks like in a nutshell? I know there's probably a whole complex range of reasons, but how can we start addressing this problem as a church if we don't even know what the problem is? So have you sort of discovered any sort of common threads through the young people who are leaving the church? What are some of the things that are leading to that?
Yeah, some of the things that were taken down in the survey, and this was a couple years ago, some of them were heartbreaking. Some were like, a few responses was like, I don't trust leadership in the church. Another one was a lack of integrity in the church. Like, I see them say one thing there, but then when I see them during the week, and we're, I'll throw it out there. We're talking about elders, deacons, people that hold positions in the church. They're not living that same lifestyle that they're asking us to live. So there's a discrepancy in which challenges their faith. Another big one was just, some of the cultural things that as second generations that we feel kind of disconnected to, that I'm not saying that they want the whole cultural thing to go away with, but maybe finding a hybrid between the two that kind of bridges, like equips, empowers, teaches our young people to value their heritage, but at the same time allowing space for us to grow into where we live in the context that we're living in today. So relevancy was also a huge thing that says they just feel like it's not relevant for me anymore. Some of the other things are like it costs too much money.
Really?
I'm like, I don't know, you was paying tithe. No, just kidding. But I think what they were trying to say, it's like they felt being torn between resources they felt that should be going to them were getting funneled into the church.
Right.
And they just kind
So
of
their parents were going broke for the church, fundraising, doing the cultural stuff rather than necessarily supporting the family, what the family needs were.
And that was one of the concerns too. And so the thing about a 2% is I don't think too many people are having this conversation because this past year, because of COVID, we have literally lost some of the main pillars of our churches here in North American Division. So you had people that planted the Adventist Samoan church here that have been pillars, like they helped build the church here, who have passed away. Right? So on one end, you have this generation that is dying. And then on the other end, you have another generation that is leaving. And we're having a conversation at the 2%, like, how do we stop the hemorrhaging? How do we stop the hemorrhaging? And what we found out is not this. Like a lot of people says, well, we need to focus on the youth and young adults. It's not, that's not the key. We need to focus on cross-generational relationships and cross-generational ministry. That is, we're not going to get this paradigm shift by us simply focusing on one generation. It's building these bridges between cross-generational ministries, learning and valuing and honoring those that have planted and have stabilized and built the church, but at the same time, allowing for our creatives to come in and take leadership roles in those areas as well. And so that's what we're trying to do prayerfully through the 2%.
Yeah, wow.
It doesn't sound like a specific problem. What you've just described, I think a lot of churches in SPD are going through the growing young, growing together process and trying to look at those cross-generational links. I guess there are specific cultural things on top of some of those things that also woven through that can help do it in a culturally contextualized manner.
Well, here's the reality. Here was a funny thing about the survey as well. So a lot of the things that were in the survey that were coming from our young people were probably the same reasons as a pastor that I see that a lot of our adults leave the church as well. Right? And so relational issues. Yeah. In the church, right? Too expensive. Have money with, issues with where the resources go, leaving the church. Not feeling as if they belong, right? Leaving the church. Though all of that in some way or another is overlapping between young and I like to call them seasoned members in our churches, right? And so, yeah, you're right. It aside from some of the specifics in regards to culture, it seems that this is something that is common throughout all of our churches.
It seems like as a pastor, you're just pushing a boulder uphill constantly. It's just like this never-ending thing. And we've only got a couple of minutes left, but a question here from Diego, I think, would sort of summarize this. We like to be practical here at Record, and we always like to leave the people watching with something that they can take home and actually do. So he asks, as members of a church, how can we provide support to our local pastor? I get the sense that pastors like to keep their personal life separate to ministry, which tends to isolate them. And it's a funny career because they become very much involved with other people's lives, yet it's not always a two-way street. So how can we provide support to you, Meshach?
Yeah, no, that's actually a good question. Love on our family, love on our children, love on our wives, and us as just individuals. Some of the practical things that our church here at South Bay has done was, maybe it's just inviting our family to spend a day at a picnic with you. Maybe it's, something as simple as showing up to one of our kids' games and supporting our kids as much as we go out and show up at your games to support your kids. Preferably your pastor does that, but this is practical that some of our family members here at our church have done. Cookies are always good. Dishes.
That's practical.
Practical ways is stuff. Just loving on the pastor. Can I also give one more sound advice for members?
Absolutely.
a lot of times it's not just what people say about the pastor, but it's also the silence of our members that know that the pastors aren't that way. And I'm not telling you to get in a confrontation with the individual, but speak up for your pastor if you know something that is being said that is not true. Take the opportunity to say, you know what? No, I know pastors. Matter of fact, that's not him or that's not her. That's not a quality trait that I know of. And so don't be afraid to correct other people on behalf of your pastor, because your pastor spends a lot of time taking a lot of blows and taking a lot of slack. And it'd be nice every now and then if the ones that really know who you are and how you function will be able to be vocal about it in a like way to make sure that you're standing up and speaking on behalf of what's true about your pastor.
Yeah, wow.
That's a really powerful idea, I guess, because in my observations and even some of the guests that we've had on our show here, it seems like in the Adventist Church, and probably all churches, but certainly in our church, there's this, we've conflated sort of being Christ-like with being meek and mild and not speaking up. And so if people are obnoxious or loud or aggressive, they can be downright bullying or spiritually abusive.
Yep.
And yet we don't say anything. We refuse to confront and to A, stand up against falsehood, but B, confront people's un-Christ-like behavior, because they might come back and accuse you of being, not loving on them or whatever. And we have a real fear of that. I think our leaders and our members often don't go into the ring for other people. We're happy to sit by and, let Judas collect his 30 pieces of silver, and we don't say anything to, stand up for anyone. So I think that's a really key issue that you've brought up, because I think if we all did that a little bit more, our churches would be less toxic and less, some of that poison that floats around in the waters would be less there. And I guess it relates to those people that are leaving, because sometimes they leave quietly. They don't say anything. They don't do anything to stand up against. And they think everyone here thinks how that bullying person thinks, because no one said anything. So I'm just going to slide out the back because I can't handle this space anymore. And I think those things are very much linked together in what we've been talking about today.
Yeah. Volume does not mean velocity. And a lot of problems with our churches is we allow those that are more vocal, which is a small percent of the church, dictate how the church functions and how the church is viewed. And the reality is the majority of the people in the church don't think like that. It's just that they're quiet about it. And so there is a way to confront and to correct without being confrontational, right? But at least say something, right?
Well, there you have it, folks. Speak up, stand up, and love your pastor and give him cookies or her cookies. Look, Meshach, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really a very valuable conversation, really hit the nail on the head with some of those big issues that we face as a church. Look, we're praying for you and your ministry, and we hope that everything's going well in the States. Hopefully that COVID train is on the downward trajectory. But yeah, all the best to you and your family, and we'll see you around.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Look forward to you guys coming out this way, and hit me up. We'll go paddling.
Sounds amazing. Hey, Meshach, before you go, and we do really appreciate you staying up late to join us. If people want to follow the ministry, the 2%, there's a website, I believe, and probably some social media platforms and stuff that you're on. People want to check out more about what's happening in that space, particularly if some of our Pacific pastors and members down here down under and in the South Pacific, how can we get access to that information? Where do we go?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. So if you go to our website, it is at the2percentpi.com. We're on Facebook at the 2% Ministry and on Instagram at the 2% PI. And so if you go to any one of those social media website platforms, you can get better information and also some of the upcoming events that we are planning to do.
Awesome. We'll link those
Awesome.
in the comments for everyone watching, so you can just click on them. And yeah, thank you again, Meshach, for joining us. And for everyone watching, we will see you again next week. See you then.
Thank you.